they will rule over Jerusalem for 8 jubilees. Remembering a jubilee is 50 years. They're going to rule for 8 jubilees over Jerusalem. So they're going to rule 400 years over Jerusalem. And then it says, afterwards, Jerusalem will become a no man's land for 1 jubilee. And then in the 9th jubilee, it will once again come back into the possession of the Jewish nation, which would signify the beginning of the Messianic end time. Now, I'm going to take you through the prophecy. So 300 years before this happened, in 1517, the Ottoman Turks conquered Jerusalem. 1517. And he said 8 jubilees would pass for 400 years, and the Turks would lose possession. 400 years later, in 1917, the British took what was then called Palestine from the Turks, exactly 400 years later. Then he said for 1 jubilee, for a period of 50 years, Jerusalem would be a no man's land. Now, what does that mean? Well, the fact of the matter is, even though Israel came back into the land in 1948, we did not have possession of Jerusalem until 1967. That's 50 years later, or 1 jubilee later. So he nailed 2 things completely. Now, 1967 to 2017 is 50 years. You see, what the rabbi said was that when Jerusalem was back in Jewish hands, it would mark the beginning of the Messianic era, or the end of times and the Messianic era. That's what the rabbi said. Now, like I said to you before, what I'm going to put forward to you here is going to be surmise. And the reason I say it is because nobody has been able to effectively date when the first Jubilee was celebrated, so they could go 50 years, 50 years, 50 years, 50 years. So we have 2 possibilities when we look at this prophecy, which is amazingly accurate. And we can say this, that when the rabbi uses the term 1 jubilee, or 8 jubilees, or whatever, he's actually referring to just a 50-year unit. Just a 50-year unit, not necessarily a jubilee. In which case it's true. But since no one has been able to date the jubilees, we have to ask ourselves why the rabbi would not say, instead of 1 jubilee, 8 jubilees, using the jubilees as units, why he would not say 400 years, 50 years, or whatever. So I'm going to present something to you today. I'm not going to claim the truth of it. But what I'm going to say is, I have as much right to say this as all the other people that tried to date the Jubilees. If in fact, this year is a Jubilee year, you see, 5778, the date that he dated from in 67 would be 5728. And the date before that would be 5678. Okay? Now, the Jubilee starts not in the new year or at the new year. The Jubilee starts at the end of Yom Kippur. The last time you hear the shofar, and it says it when the Jubilee starts here, I'll read it to you, Leviticus 25, when it speaks about the Jubilee. It says, verse 9, then you shall cause the trumpet of the Jubilee, that's the Yovel, you shall cause it to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month, on the Day of Atonement. You shall make the trumpet to sound throughout all your land, and consecrate the 50th year, and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you, and each of you shall return to his possession, and each of you shall return to his family. Now, if this is so, Yom Kippur is coming up at the end of this week. 5778 has just begun. And if the trumpet is to sound on Yom Kippur, it would be sounding the beginning of the Jubilee year. Do you understand that? This is an awesome thing if it's true. So when you blow the trumpet on Yom Kippur, that's the last trump you hear. You don't hear any more. They start blowing them a month before Rosh Hashanah, and then they blow them at Rosh Hashanah, and the last trumpet is blown on Yom Kippur. But specifically, in the year of Jubilee, that trumpet sounds on the Day of Atonement, on Yom Kippur. And it ushers in the time of Jubilee. Now, if Rabbi Judah ben Samuel, Yehuda Chassid, was speaking of actual Jubilees, then we're coming into a Jubilee year that begins in 2017. Now, there are a lot of people in the church who think, oh, the rapture is coming. It doesn't say that. But what it does say is that something special is about to happen.
Yeah.
Something very, very special.